Welcome back. You're watching The Firm. Over the last 6 months or so, SEBI's adjudicating officers have found several corporate employees guilty of violating the Prohibition of Insider Trading or PIT regulations of 1992. Now, all of these orders are to do with the same violation. The employees failed to disclose to the company and the stock exchange trades exceeding 5 lakh rupees in value. Now, the PIT regulations require that any person who is a director or officer of a listed company shall disclose to the company and the stock exchange if there has been a change in such holdings of such person and his dependents, and that change exceeds 5 lakh rupees in value or 25,000 shares or 1% of total shareholding or voting rights, whichever is lower. Now, this disclosure has to be done within 2 working days of the transaction. These dozen employees that have been found guilty over the last 1 year include a human resource head in a vertical business unit at ITC, a chief sales officer in charge of certain geographies at Wipro, a general manager of special products at M&M, a general manager of plant quality at M&M Nasik, and a senior vice president in charge of manufacturing processes. In finding them guilty, SEBI seems to have expanded the definition of officer considerably to include just about any person with authority to give directions to other employees. So who exactly is an officer? To answer that question, I have with me JSA's Somashekar Sundaresan and FinSec Sandeep Parekh. Sandeep, thank you very much for joining me. The main debate in this almost 1 dozen orders seems to focus on how do you define officer. Would you agree, Sandeep, that SEBI seems to have widened the definition of officer considerably to even include general managers?
Yes, I think they seem to have widened it, and I think the real flaw lies with a particular SAT ruling which they've relied in almost all the cases.
Right, which is the
Sundaram Finance case, where they have in fact misinterpreted the definition of officer which is there in the Companies Act, which seems to suggest that those people who can give directions to the board of directors or directors.
Yeah.
So we're looking at essentially we're looking at people 1 level below the board. We are not looking at people who can which is what the interpretation of
not
SAT
just
is.
1 level, many levels below the
anybody
board, right?
if you report to anybody at all, which basically means everybody except for the sweepers who, assuming the sweeper
well, even maintenance staff, you know,
yes,
responds to one leader of some
correct,
sort. So
correct.
The head of the maintenance staff team would also then come under the definition of officer, because, you know, his directions are followed by a group of employees,
absolutely.
right?
So anybody except for the last layer of the company would actually be liable, which is, I think, a completely absurd definition, and in contrary to what is specifically put in. I mean, you can't imagine a person second rung from the bottom giving directions to the board of directors. I think that's the absurd
yeah, so a couple of things here. So, the definition of officer as per either company law, old one, because that's the one that applies in this case, and how the Sundaram Finance case looks at it. So the old Companies Act, which is 1956, says officer includes any director, manager, secretary, or any person in accordance with whose directions or instructions the board of directors or any one or more of the directors is or are accustomed to act. The Sundaram Finance case says an officer means a person holding an appointment to an office which carries with it an authority to give directions to other employees. Which one are we supposed to follow in trying to determine whether these people are officers or not?
See, I think the flaw really lies in having a charging provision on an officer. It should have been on the basis of functionality of a rule. So to take your earlier comment, if it's a sweeper whose job is to clean the office of the CFO or the office of the MD, there is a good chance he will have physical access to unpublished price sensitive information. So just giving a designation for an officer or a peon or a manager, I think that's a very wrong artificial.
Go back to the specific sections of the PIT regulations, and these are disclosure sections, right? So it says any person who is a director or officer of a listed company shall disclose to the company, etc., etc.
Sure. The point
I'm making, director and officer.
The point I'm making is the flaw in the regulation is to have a charge on an officer rather than have a charging provision only on materiality of the transaction.
No, but this is not substantive insider trading. I would agree with you.
It's only a lack of disclosures.
Disclosure, the threshold is extremely low.
In my view, if a trade is of a particular material nature, regardless of designation, it should be picked up for reporting. And that can't be 5 lakhs, that's too low a threshold.
So is it your contention therefore, and I'll read out some of the designations involved here, okay? General Manager Special Projects, General Manager Product Management, then Executive Vice President and CFO, well that might apply. Senior General Manager Technical Hub, General Manager Plant Quality, Mechanical Engineer with technical background and working with Central Process Engineering for 5 Mahindra plants, Senior Vice President of Manufacturing, General Manager of EDC, General Manager of Vehicle Integration. These are officers? As envisaged by the PIT regs are these officers? Because it says officer or director.
It's a question of fact.
So I would respectfully disagree with Som on whether it's a matter of fact, because I think it's a matter of law. The law says a person who is used to giving instructions to the board of directors or directors.
Right.
We're looking at very senior people. So I think the law is pretty clear. It's been misinterpreted by SAT.
Yeah. By SAT in the Sundaram case is what you're saying.
Case, which is what has been followed by all of.
But SEBI could have chosen to apply its regulations in the simplest format and say, look, it says officer or director. You're equating the two designations virtually.
The real problem here is that because there is a power to penalize, penalties have been imposed.
I think that's.
Look at the materiality element of these. Some of these orders, not all. Some of them are really not material, and in some cases, it appears that there have been penalties by the company also internally. So some of these, I think, are trial balloons in some sense of establishing a precedent, and then that precedent will get tested.
But that's my
and
worry.
To keep following.
So what is the precedent here? This means pretty much anybody who runs a team of 3, 5 or 8 people, you know, or more than that in an organization can be categorized officer by SEBI's adjudicating officers, and hence if they've sold shares that violate any of these thresholds and not made disclosures. These are only disclosure norms I'm talking about. I'm not talking about insider trading in the purest sense of insider
trading. I'd come back to my original point. I think the problem is the materiality of the threshold.
Let's get to first principles. What is the purpose of this particular regulation? The purpose is that if you routinely have access to inside information, we will impose a higher standard on you.
If you want
to apply the same standard on all employees, you should have said employees. Why should we say officer as defined by Companies Act, which talks of those people who instruct board of directors level people?
There is a logic to it. If you're reasonably expected to have access to information, you're an insider. If you've sold beyond a certain materiality threshold, let's say you've done a 25 lakh trade or a 50 lakh trade, do you think a defense can be, I'm only a peon, but I've traded for 25 lakhs? Peon is a very easy, bad example perhaps. Let's say you're a general manager for a large functional role, right? And you've sold for 25 lakhs. You may not have had access directly, but somebody who has had access would have given you the information.
This is beautiful, because this is the most curious part of many of these orders. They find all these general managers fit the category of officer, you know,
and apply a penalty.
And say you've sold more than 5 lakh rupees worth of shares, you didn't make the disclosures to the company and the stock exchange, hence you are guilty of violation. Many of these people are self-confessedly people who have sold in closed periods. The orders mention that as well, saying, look, many of you, you've sold in a closed period as your company has disclosed to us, right? But the orders and the penalty amount doesn't take that violation into account at all.
There could be a reason.
So whatever beautiful fine point you're making, I'm saying, in this case, when it just comes to the disclosure requirements, have this adjudicating officers been fair to expand the definition so wide? And why is it that they've ignored the closed period trades, which to me seems like a more egregious violation than the lack of a disclosure at a general manager level?
There are 2 points that come from your comments. The first, the second one is the easier one, which Sandeep started with. They're applying a case law laid down by the SAT. Right? So the AO is just applying what SAT has said. Right, wrong, it's not his thing. So the Sundaram Finance didn't carry the SAT order up in appeal in the Supreme Court. So whether we like it or not, that's a judgment of SAT which is applicable, and they've applied it. But on the other issue, in terms of whether they have done any other violation and whether that has been let off, in all likelihood, and we don't know because the orders don't speak about it, in all likelihood these were instances reported by the company to SEBI under clause 7 of the model code.
That's stated in the order.
So the company would have taken its own action and would have forwarded it to SEBI for reporting. So SEBI could have well taken a view that if the guy has been penalized, now there is also a disclosure problem, So now I'll penalize a disclosure bit. Ideally, all this should be articulated in the order. The orders are silent about it, we don't know.
The orders are penalized ostensibly only on the lack of disclosures. Nowhere in the penalty portions does it say we are penalizing you for this violation and for this violation. Though the violation of closed period trades is mentioned
So they've exercised a prerogative to pick the violation that remains to be penalized in their regulatory discretionary view.
Okay, I don't know. Put all together.
I would put that one step further. I would say that these are all we're killing mosquitoes or flies with nuclear weapons. I mean, these kind of, I mean, that's a point someone also raised. Why are we getting into small technical violations? If any of them are guilty,
how does one make that argument? That I can't sit here saying why are you getting into technical violations? It's a technical violation.
No, the problem is Shriram Mutual Fund judgment of the Supreme Court is quoted like it's being parroted. It's wrong law. The Supreme Court
in these orders as well.
It's wrongly interpreted. The Supreme Court has not said that if there is a violation, you have to penalize. The court has not said that. The court has acknowledged that it's a discretionary provision.
I think my other question really is that why go after everybody who's violated? And the fact is, anything which gets reported to SEBI, they think is their, God-bound duty to pass an order which penalizes that person.
Look, that's a tough one to argue. If you're in violation and if everybody agrees that you are in violation,
a penalty needn't follow.
But you can't criticize them. You can't criticize them for levying a penalty.
No, you can, because the charm in being a regulator is not in scoring penal victories. The charm in being a regulator is in having a compliant market.
Okay,
penalty is only one
tool. The regulator feels if I had not imposed this, these cases would not become so big, this information and this precedent would not be said.
That's what
the message would not go out.
They want to send a message.
No, you can send a message. You can say that we issue a warning letter to these people.
That's right.
Okay, fine. At the end of this, how have you spoken to companies? How are they reacting to this? Because many companies are seriously spooked about the level of disclosures now required. If every general manager is an officer in an organization that hires, tens of thousands of employees, you're in deep trouble.
Yeah, and from what I understand from the market, it's not even clear that you need to report every violation of the model code of conduct, which is not the case in this. But a lot of companies are debating whether they should report every single violation, because there might be 100, 200 violations and small technical violations. Somebody's bought 5 shares in a kind of
closed
window. Stuff like that, people are confused whether they should report every single violation to SEBI, and people do call up and say, should we report it or not? And I don't have a clear answer, because it says that you need to report substantive violations at the least, which means the regulation. But whether you need to report the model code of conduct violations, I don't know.
Okay, last word to you, Sam.
I think companies do take it seriously. The problem really is that the model code applies to designated employees, whereas the disclosure provision simply says officer, director. Those two had to be interlinked, and that's one of the areas of reform that we hope will
what are you telling clients? What, every general manager in your company has to make these disclosures to the company and the stock exchange?
If it's beyond the materiality threshold, yes.
Okay, wow.
Yes, the threshold needs reform. It's too low. 5 lakhs is nothing today. It needs reform.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, to both of you for joining us on this episode of The Firm. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next week.